Okay, so good morning, class. So our topic for today is the week 3 in your LMS. This is the continuation of our discussion in our previous session in the estate tax. So today we are going to discuss the gross estate. So on this topic, we are going to discuss what are the inclusions from the gross estate of the decedent subject to estate tax, but please take note that the gross estate is only it's about the values of all the properties that can be transferred by the decedent to the lawful heirs and beneficiaries before the allowable deductions from the gross estate. So what we are going to discuss here, again, the inclusions of the properties that is subject to gross estate. Our learning objectives here is to define the gross estate, to identify the components of the gross estate, to determine the value of the gross estate, and to identify some additions to the gross estate. So what is the gross estate? Okay, the gross estate, it consists of all the property owned by the decedent at the time of his death that can be transferred to the lawful heirs and beneficiaries. But please take note that the exclusive properties of the surviving spouse is not part of the gross estate of the decedent. That's why in the gross estate, we have to identify the properties if it is a conjugal or exclusive, because the exclusive properties are the properties which is acquired by the decedent before the marriage. Because according to the family code, if a couple are married on August 1 of 1988, okay, all the properties acquired by the couple within the marriage that will be served as a conjugal property. But for all the couples who are married being less than 1988, the properties which they acquire while they are single, that will be exclusive properties. Okay, that's why we classify the properties from of the gross estate if it is a conjugal or exclusive. So what are the components of the gross estate? The gross estate are composed of the following: the real properties. These are the immovable properties such as the land, building, and resorts, okay, or any properties that attached to the land. Personal properties, those are the franchise, the shares, obligation, or bonds issued by the foreign corporation, provided that the franchise or the obligations or the bonds or the stocks are 85% owned in the Philippines, and it is acquired in the business status in the Philippines, and the corporation, the stocks are established in the Philippines. Okay, so please take note of the classification of the decedents in order to identify the inclusions of the gross estate. Okay, the summary of the gross estate. Okay, or the estate rather. So these are the classifications of the decedents. Okay, so please take note about the check marks and the X marks. If the decedent is a resident citizen, please take note that all his or her properties, real and personal properties within and outside the Philippines, okay, that is subject or that will be inclusions to the gross estate. If the decedent is a non-resident, which is there's no reciprocity. When I say no reciprocity, in the Philippine tax system, the reciprocity is if the country is giving exemptions to the Filipino taxpayers who are residing in abroad, but they are not a resident of the citizen of the country, then it will be reciprocity. The foreigner will be also give exemptions here. Okay, that's the reciprocity. But if the decedent is a non-resident and there's no reciprocity, please take note that only the properties within the Philippines is subject to estate tax, and it will be inclusions of the gross estate. the real properties within the Philippines. And when it comes to the personal properties within the Philippines, intangible or tangible, it will be inclusion, intangible and intangible within the Philippines, that will be inclusions to the gross estate. But if the decedent is a non-resident with reciprocity, non-resident citizen, but there's a reciprocity, only the tangible personal properties and real properties within the Philippines is subject to estate tax and inclusions to the gross estate. Okay, so what are the additions to the gross estate? So what are those additives? Okay, the revocable transfer. These are the transfer property with the retention of the reservation of rights over the property while the decedent he lives. Those are the additives on the gross estate. And transfers in the contemplation of death. These are properties that are not physically available in the estate, but at the time of the death, in the anticipation of his death or the death of the decedent. Another is the property passing under the GPA or the power of appointment. Okay, the right to designate by will or the person who will receive the property. It talks about the testamentary addition to the gross estate. And the decedent's interest, including the dividends, profits, proceeds in any insurance, or the right of usufruct can be additives to the gross estate. The proceeds of the life insurance with revocable beneficiary, administrator, or his executor, the transfers for insufficient consideration, claims against insolvent person, and the amount received by heirs under the Republic Act 4917. Okay, so those are the additions to the gross estate. Okay, so let's have the following illustration about the inclusions of the gross estate. Let's say a decedent, okay, has the following estate to be transferred. Vacation house in Hong Kong, land in Zamboanga, house in Camarines, apartment in New York City, car in Hong Kong, car in the Philippines, jewelries in New York, franchise in New York, franchise in Hong Kong, franchise in the Philippines, accounts receivable from the Philippines, accounts receivable from New York, accounts receivable from Hong Kong, investment from New York, investment from the Philippines, investment from Hong Kong, domestic shares in the Philippines, domestic shares in New York, the foreign shares which is 90% in the Philippines, the foreign shares which is 30% in the Philippines, and the foreign shares which is 60% in the Philippines. Now, let us compute for the following inclusions of the gross estate if the decedent is a resident citizen, non-resident citizen with and without reciprocity. Okay, so this is the illustration. So now let us compute for the inclusions of the gross estate. So the answer, if the decedent is a resident citizen, all the gross estate, all the properties within and outside the Philippines are included in the gross estate, regardless of the exclusive and gross conjugal. So the total gross estate of the resident citizen is 4,555,000. For the non-resident citizen with no reciprocities, the total gross estate is 4,925,000. So please take note that the non-resident citizen with no reciprocity, only the real properties, the personal properties, tangible and intangible within the Philippines is subject or will be inclusions to the gross estate and subject to estate tax. So what are the composition of the 4,925,000 gross estate? The land in Zamboanga, house in Camarines, cars in the Philippines, franchise in the Philippines, accounts receivable in the Philippines, investment in the Philippines, domestic share in the Philippines, foreign shares in the Philippines, which is the 90%. And for the non-resident citizen with reciprocity, the amount of the gross estate is 3,730,000. And what are the composition of 3,730,000? Land in Zamboanga, house in Camarines, and car in the Philippines. Because if the decedent is a non-resident citizen with reciprocity, only the tangible personal property in the Philippines and real property in the Philippines are inclusions to the gross estate. Okay, so how do we evaluate? How do we evaluate or to measure the value of the gross estate? For the real and personal property, the basis of the valuation of the gross estate is the fair market value at the time of the death of the decedent, whichever is higher. Example, the fair market value of the land is 1.2 million at the time of the death, and the cost of land is 1 million, and the fair market value of BIR is 1.4. So what will be the valuation of the land? Of course, the fair market value for whichever is higher at the time of the death, so that is the fair market value of the BIR, which is the 1.4 million, because it is higher than the fair market value of the land of the decedent at the time of his death. And for the stocks, bonds, and other securities, the value to be declared in the gross estate, if the bonds and the stocks are listed in the Philippine Stock Exchange, get the average of the highest and lowest of the selling price multiplied by the shares. If not listed in the Philippine Stock Exchange, for the common stock with the book value, that will be the basis of the valuation of the gross estate, and for the preferred stock, the par value. Okay, so that will be our topic for today when it comes to the inclusions of the gross estate.